The night I first realized I had the gift, the air outside was unnaturally still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. It was late, and I was alone in the tiny antiques shop I'd been managing for the past year. The dim, flickering fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting erratic shadows across the cluttered shelves. The old clocks and tarnished silverware seemed more alive than usual, their edges sharper, their surfaces glinting with an uncanny brightness. The object that changed everything was a simple, worn locket. I found it tucked away in a forgotten drawer while sorting through the latest estate sale haul. Its delicate engraving of intertwining vines was barely visible beneath a layer of tarnish, but something about it drew me in. When I touched it, the world around me shifted. The room dimmed as a strange chill settled in my chest. My vision blurred, and then it happened. A flood of images, sensations, and emotions, none of them mine. A girl's laughter, the sharp pang of heartbreak, and the metallic taste of tears, all tied to this tiny, unassuming trinket. My hands trembled as I dropped the locket, the visions vanishing as quickly as they had come. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, but the sensation lingered, an echo in my bones. I told myself it was exhaustion or an overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew better. This was something else, something I couldn't explain, something I wasn't ready to confront. The days that followed were a blur of curiosity and fear. I tested my newfound ability cautiously, touching other objects in the shop. Each one told a story. A cracked porcelain doll carried the weight of a child's loneliness. A rusted pocket knife whispered of betrayal and regret. The revelations were vivid, like glimpses into fragments of lives long gone. But with each touch, I noticed something strange. The visions weren't just draining, they were taking something from me. At first it was subtle, a faint headache, a moment of dizziness. Then it grew worse. My hands shook more often, and my skin grew pale, almost translucent. People began commenting on how tired I looked, how thin I'd become, though I was eating and sleeping as usual. One night after a particularly vivid vision from an antique brooch, a desperate woman pleading with someone I couldn't see. I sat in the darkened shop, clutching my head as an unbearable ache surged behind my eyes. The room spun, and for a moment, I thought I would pass out. When I looked up, I swore the shadows had moved, pooling thicker around the corners of the room like silent watchers. I wanted to stop. I wanted to put the objects away, to forget this strange gift entirely. But the pull was too strong. Every item whispered to me, promising answers to questions I didn't know I had, luring me with the possibility of understanding the stories etched into their surfaces. It was a gift, yes, but it was also a curse. The locket was the first object to haunt me, but it wouldn't be the last. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice a pattern. The visions weren't random, they were connected, threads weaving through different objects to form a tapestry of loss and betrayal. The locket, the brooch, an old leather-bound journal. They all seemed tied to the same tragedy, a long-forgotten story that begged to be unraveled. One evening, as rain drummed against the shop's windows, I succumbed to my curiosity and touched the locket again. The visions returned, sharper this time. I saw the girl more clearly, a young woman with auburn hair and a vibrant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She held the locket tightly, her fingers trembling as she whispered a name. Julian. The scene shifted. I felt her anguish as she stood on a desolate cliffside, the wind tearing at her dress. She hurled the locket into the sea, her scream swallowed by the crashing waves. And then, darkness. I jerked my hand away, gasping for air. My head throbbed, and my vision swam, but the memory of her grief clung to me like a second skin. I staggered to the back room, where I kept a pot of tea brewing, hoping the warmth would chase away the cold knot in my chest. But as I reached for the teacup, my reflection in the shop's mirror caught my eye. I barely recognized myself. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes sunken, and my skin had taken on a grayish pallor. I looked, faded, like the edges of an old photograph blurred by time. "What's happening to me?" I whispered. The locket and its story were consuming me, draining me piece by piece, yet I couldn't stop. I needed to know more, to uncover the truth that the objects seemed desperate to share. The next object in the chain was the journal. Its cracked leather cover smelled of mildew and secrets, its pages filled with elegant, looping handwriting that had faded to near illegibility. The words were disjointed, as though the writer had been in a frenzy. Names and places stood out: Julian, Ashmore Estate, betrayal, revenge. I touched the journal, bracing myself for another flood of images. This time the vision was darker, heavier. I saw a sprawling manor, its once grand facade crumbling with neglect. Shadows flitted across its windows, too quick to be human. Inside, a figure paced in a dimly lit room, their face obscured, but their anguish palpable. A single sentence burned into my mind, as though it had been carved there. "The truth will cost you everything." When the vision faded, I collapsed into a chair, my strength sapped. The shadows in the shop seemed to press closer, their shapes more distinct. I thought I heard a whisper, faint and fleeting, just beyond the edge of hearing. It was then I realized this wasn't just a story to uncover, it was a warning, and I was running out of time. The journal's revelation haunted me for days. "The truth will cost you everything." The words echoed in my mind, threading through my thoughts like a dark chant. I resolved to put the objects away, to stop probing into the lives they carried, but the pull was too strong. Each time I locked them away, the shadows in the shop seemed to grow darker, denser, as though they were aware of my hesitation. One evening, as the rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled in the distance, the shadows finally spoke. I was sitting at the counter, staring at the locket and journal, debating whether to touch them again. The room had grown cold, unnaturally so, and the light from the overhead bulbs flickered erratically. Then I heard it, a whisper, low and guttural, coming from somewhere just beyond the edge of my awareness. "You seek the truth." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice wasn't human. It carried a weight, an otherness that sent a shiver down my spine. I looked around, my gaze darting to the corners of the room where the shadows loomed thickest. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling. The reply came, soft and insidious. "One who knows what you wish to uncover. You cannot stop now. The truth is within your grasp." I wanted to run, to flee the oppressive weight of the shop, but my feet were rooted to the floor. Instead, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the visions began. "What's happening to me?" The shadows seemed to shift, swirling as though responding to my words. "The gift and the curse are one. With each truth you unveil, you offer a piece of yourself. It is the price of knowing." I shook my head, fear tightening in my chest. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want it." "But you did. The moment you touched the locket, you accepted the bargain. You have no choice now but to see it through." The room grew colder, the voice more insistent. "There is justice to be found, but it will not come without sacrifice. Your choice is this: abandon the truth and let it fester, or pay the price and uncover what must be known." I swallowed hard, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. My body trembled, weakened by the toll the visions had already taken, but the lure of the truth was irresistible. I had come too far to turn back. "What happens if I stop?" I whispered. The shadows stilled, their answer sharp and unyielding. "The truth will never leave you. It will cling to you, unseen but felt, like a wound that will not heal. But if you continue—" The voice hesitated, then added, almost with relish, "You may find justice, for them and for yourself." Before I could respond, the shadows dissolved, retreating into the far corners of the room. The air warmed slightly, and the light stabilized. I was alone again, but the choice had been made. That night I touched the locket once more, bracing myself for whatever truth it held. The visions came in fragments, disjointed and dizzying. The young woman with auburn hair, her name was Clara, I realized, pleaded with someone, her voice raw with desperation. "You promised me, Julian," she cried. "You said you'd fix this." The scene shifted, and I found myself standing in a grand room, its walls lined with dark wood and heavy drapes. A man, tall and severe, loomed over Clara. His expression was unreadable, but his presence exuded control. I knew instinctively that this was Julian. He held a piece of paper, its edges trembling in his hands as though it bore unbearable weight. "You've doomed us both," he said, his voice like stone breaking. "There's nothing left to do." Another shift. This time I was in the same room, but it was empty, its air thick with an eerie silence. The locket lay abandoned on the floor, its chain broken. Outside, through the tall windows, I could see storm clouds roiling, dark and foreboding. The vision ended abruptly, leaving me gasping for breath. I sat in the dim shop, my body weak and my mind racing. The shadows had been right. There was a terrible injustice buried within this story, a betrayal that had torn lives apart. And it wasn't finished. The journal provided the next clue. This time I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. Its words leapt from the page as though alive, the ink shimmering faintly in the flickering light. Ashmore Estate. The truth lies in its walls. I knew the name. Ashmore Estate was a crumbling manor on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and whispered about in hushed tones. People said it was cursed, that those who ventured inside came out changed, or didn't come out at all. The thought of going there filled me with dread, but I knew I had no choice. The shadows had made it clear. The truth wouldn't leave me alone until I faced it. That night I prepared to visit the estate. I packed a flashlight, a notebook, and the locket, its cold weight heavy in my pocket. As I locked up the shop, the shadows seemed to watch me, their silence more oppressive than ever. The journey to Ashmore Estate was uneventful, but as I approached the imposing gates, a chill ran down my spine. The air here was different, thicker, colder, as though the estate itself exhaled an unearthly presence. The tall windows of the manor stared back at me like hollow eyes, and the wind whispered faintly through the trees. I stepped through the gates, the gravel crunching under my feet. The shadows seemed to deepen around me, and I felt their weight settle on my shoulders. The truth was waiting inside, but so was something else, something I couldn't yet name. As I reached the front steps, the door creaked open, as though inviting me in. The air inside was stifling, and the faint scent of mildew and decay filled my nose. My flashlight cast long, jittering shadows on the walls, and each step I took echoed unnaturally. And then I saw it, a faint figure at the end of the hall standing impossibly still. "Clara," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't move, but the air seemed to shift, a low hum vibrating through the space. I realized with a sinking dread that the silent trial had begun.